My name is Isabel Flores. I poured my life into my architecture career while my brother David drained our parents' inheritance. For Dad's 80th birthday, David, overseeing finances, hosted a humble party, loudly proclaiming, "This is all Dad's meager savings could afford now." He underestimated me. The celebration took an unforeseen turn when my latest business deal was announced. If you've ever faced financial betrayal from family, where would you draw the line? Like and subscribe to join me on this journey of shattered trust. The scent of freshly mown grass always clung to Willow Creek, a comforting aroma that, for me, carried a bittersweet echo of childhood. It was a scent that spoke of endless summer afternoons spent sketching dream houses in the shade of our sprawling oak tree, long before I ever dreamed of holding a real blueprint. My name is Isabel, and while my brother, David, reveled in the familiar, slow rhythm of our hometown, I yearned for the dizzying heights of towering skylines and the challenging geometry of complex structures. From an early age, our paths diverged, laying the groundwork for a rivalry that would stretch across decades, subtly shaping our family's landscape. Our parents, Robert and Susan Flores, were the bedrock of our small, suburban existence. Dad, a steady civil engineer, believed in foundations, in buildings, in character, in family. Mom, a third-grade teacher with an inexhaustible well of patience, poured her heart into nurturing young minds and occasionally into mending the small cracks that appeared between her two very different children. David, 3 years my senior, possessed a charm that was almost a superpower. He could talk his way out of any scrape, convince Mom to bake an extra batch of cookies, and sweet-talk Dad into lending him money for his endless next big thing. He was impulsive, charismatic, and utterly lacking in financial foresight. I, on the other hand, was the meticulous one. My childhood bedroom wasn't just a space for dolls. It was a burgeoning architectural studio, filled with scale models made of cardboard and carefully drafted floor plans. My piggy bank was a fortress, its contents earmarked for a future far grander than Willow Creek could offer. The early loans to David were small, almost negligible. A new bike here, concert tickets there. But as we grew, so did the size of David's investments. He'd come home from college with tales of groundbreaking tech startups or revolutionary app ideas, always just needing a small capital injection to truly take off. Mom and Dad, ever hopeful, ever generous, would dip into their savings, believing they were nurturing their son's entrepreneurial spirit. I watched with growing unease, my architectural mind calculating the diminishing returns, the escalating risk. My phone calls home grew strained. Mom would subtly change the subject if I asked about David's latest venture. Dad would clear his throat, murmuring about market fluctuations. It was an unspoken financial hemorrhage, slowly draining their security, yet no one seemed willing to confront David directly. My departure for architectural school in New York, armed with a full scholarship and a burning desire for tangible achievement, felt less like leaving and more like escaping a slow-motion disaster. While I pulled all-nighters, hunched over drafting tables, my fingers smudged with ink, David remained in Willow Creek, a ghost in the machine of various ill-fated business attempts. I interned at firms whose buildings pierced the clouds, learning the intricate dance of steel and glass, concrete and light. I built my firm, Flores and Associates, from the ground up, each project a testament to dedication, precision, and an unwavering commitment to integrity. We specialized in urban revitalization, transforming neglected spaces into vibrant community hubs. The accolades piled up: industry awards, features in prestigious design magazines, a growing reputation for turning forgotten corners into thriving centers. Yet with each triumph, the chasm between David and me seemed to widen. Holiday visits became exercises in polite evasion. David, still struggling financially, seemed to resent my success, interpreting it as a direct affront to his own failures. He'd make subtle digs about my fancy city life, about how I was too busy for family, hints that stung more than he knew, given how often I quietly supplemented Mom and Dad's dwindling finances. The most painful fracture occurred after our grandparents' passing. They had left a modest but crucial inheritance, intended to provide Mom and Dad with a comfortable retirement. I urged them to seek professional financial advice, to invest it wisely, securely. David, however, saw another opportunity. He convinced them, with his usual blend of charm and manufactured urgency, that he could manage the inheritance, promising staggering returns through his exclusive, cutting-edge investment opportunities. Mom and Dad, vulnerable in their grief and desperate to believe in their son, handed over control. Within a year, the bulk of it was gone, swallowed by a series of reckless, poorly researched ventures. I only learned the full, devastating truth during a visit home, finding Mom weeping quietly in the kitchen, Dad staring blankly at bank statements, his shoulders slumped in defeat. David, of course, had an elaborate explanation, a tangled web of excuses blaming global markets and unforeseen economic shifts. But I saw through it. He had gambled away their security, their future, with a casual disregard that chilled me to the bone. This betrayal, this fundamental breach of trust, wounded me more deeply than any direct slight. It wasn't just the money, it was the sacred trust he had so carelessly shattered. From that moment on, my relationship with David became a carefully constructed facade, polite but distant. I continued to support Mom and Dad, discreetly depositing funds into their accounts, managing their bills from afar, ensuring they had what they needed without ever explicitly mentioning David's catastrophic mismanagement. They, in turn, were too proud, too loyal to fully admit the extent of his actions to anyone, least of all him. I channeled my anger and frustration into my work, determined to build something so solid, so undeniable, that no one could ever undermine it. My success became a silent testament, a shield against the chaos David had sown. As Dad's 80th birthday approached, a milestone that should have been pure joy, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. David had appointed himself the lead organizer, and I knew, with a certainty that settled cold in my bones, that this celebration would be fraught with more than just cake and balloons. It would be a subtle battleground, where old wounds would inevitably be exposed. The invitation arrived by text message, a surprisingly casual affair for such a momentous milestone. Dad's 80th birthday bash. Saturday, October 15th, 6 p.m. Willow Creek Community Center. Casual dress, just bring yourselves. RSVP to David. My phone, usually buzzing with high-stakes architectural bids and complex design approvals, felt heavy in my hand as I read David's blunt message. The Willow Creek Community Center. I stared at the screen, a faint frown creasing my brow. It was a utilitarian brick building, a relic from the 1970s, known more for weekly bingo nights and local council meetings than jubilant birthday celebrations. My firm had recently completed the design for a state-of-the-art civic center in a neighboring town, a gleaming, sustainable structure that had garnered national attention. The stark contrast screamed louder than any words. I called Mom, trying to keep my tone light, almost conversational. "Hey, Mom, got David's invite for Dad's birthday. The community center? Are you sure that's what Dad wants?" Her voice, usually warm and bright, held a familiar tremor, a subtle weariness I knew all too well. "Oh, Isabel, dear," she sighed softly. "David insisted. He said it was more practical and easier to manage with the budget." The word budget hung in the air like a thick, uncomfortable fog, heavy with the unspoken context of their depleted retirement savings, a direct consequence of David's disastrous investments. He had, in the aftermath of that debacle, appointed himself the meticulous manager of their remaining finances, presumably to prevent further mishaps. But I suspected it was more about controlling the narrative, ensuring Mom and Dad remained beholden to his generosity, or lack thereof. He managed their bills, their meager remaining investments, and, apparently, their milestone celebrations. It felt less like helpful oversight and more like a carefully constructed financial cage, locking them into a reality defined by his past mistakes. A few days later, David called. His voice, usually smooth and jovial, had an underlying edge of possessiveness, a subtle flexing of his self-proclaimed authority. "So, Isabel, glad you got the invite. Don't worry about bringing anything. I've got everything handled. Finances are tight, after certain market downturns," he chuckled, the not-so-subtle jab at the inheritance he'd squandered cutting through me. "But I've managed to pull together a respectable celebration. Dad will appreciate the simplicity. No need for anything fancy from your big city world." The implication was clear. I was out of touch, my success a symbol of my detachment from their real struggles. He positioned himself as the dutiful son, the one who understood the family's new reality, while I was the prodigal daughter, returning only to observe, perhaps even to judge. I bit back a sharp retort. Of course, David, I'm just looking forward to seeing Dad. Let me know if you need any help with anything. He quickly dismissed my offer, almost too quickly. No, I've got it covered. Bethany's been a tremendous help too, bless her heart. Bethany, David's wife, a woman whose fixed smile rarely reached her eyes, and who always seemed to relish in David's subtle power plays, was yet another layer of discomfort. Her quiet judgments were often sharper than David's open barbs. The drive to Willow Creek felt longer than usual. Each mile deepened the sense of trepidation that settled in my stomach. I thought of the countless hours I'd spent designing, overseeing, building. My firm had just landed its largest project to date, the acquisition and redevelopment of several key properties in a growing suburban corridor, transforming outdated structures into vibrant, mixed-use spaces. It was a complex, multi-million-dollar deal that had consumed my life for months, pushing me to my absolute limits. The final signatures were set to happen the Monday after Dad's birthday, the ink barely dry on the contracts. I hadn't shared the full scope of the deal with my family, knowing David would either dismiss it as irrelevant or find a way to undermine it. This significant professional achievement felt alien to the subdued, budget-conscious reality I was re-entering, a jarring clash of worlds. Pulling into my parents' driveway, the familiar scent of Mom's blooming garden roses did little to calm my nerves. David's gleaming, almost ostentatious, new luxury sedan was already there, parked squarely in front of the garage, a stark contrast to their modest minivan. As I stepped out of my own vehicle, a practical but sleek hybrid, David emerged from the front door, a slight smirk playing on his lips, a look of triumph I knew all too well. Bethany stood just behind him, a knowing glint in her eyes, a silent partner in his performance. "Well, look who finally graced us with her presence," David drawled, his arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe as if he owned the place. "Cutting it a bit close for the big party, aren't we, Isabel? Some of us have been here all week, putting in the real work, making sure everything is just so." The casual barb was perfectly aimed, a clear reminder of his perceived superior effort and my presumed neglect, his constant need to highlight his self-sacrifice versus my ambition. It was the opening salvo in what I knew would be a long, uncomfortable weekend, a prelude to the inevitable public display of his self-appointed financial stewardship. The stage was set, the players in their places, and I could already feel the heavy weight of unspoken accusations settling over our family reunion. The air, despite the sunshine, felt charged with an unspoken tension, an undercurrent of rivalry that had defined our relationship for far too long. The Willow Creek Community Center on Saturday evening was exactly as I had grimly envisioned. A vast, somewhat dreary hall, its institutional lighting casting a pallid glow over everything. Hastily strung streamers, bought from a discount store, sagged listlessly from the ceiling, their colors muted by the fluorescent glare. Balloons, already deflating, clustered in sad bouquets near the stage. Round tables, covered in thin, utilitarian white paper tablecloths, were scattered across the polished linoleum floor, each holding a small, wilting centerpiece of supermarket flowers, their petals already browning at the edges. The air hummed with the indistinct murmur of conversation, punctuated by the clatter of plastic cutlery against flimsy paper plates, a symphony of frugality. David Miller, my brother, stood near the entrance, acting as the self-appointed master of ceremonies. His chest was puffed out, his shoulders set in a posture of exaggerated responsibility. He greeted each arriving guest with a hearty handshake, his voice booming slightly louder than necessary, clearly reveling in his role as the diligent son who had single-handedly organized this modest affair. He wore a slightly too tight suit jacket over a casual button-down, a clear attempt to look authoritative, but it only served to highlight his underlying desperation for recognition. His wife, Bethany, hovered nearby, her expression a careful blend of forced cheerfulness and quiet satisfaction, occasionally murmuring approval as David held court, basking in the sympathetic glances of relatives who bought into his narrative. As soon as Mom and Dad, Robert and Susan Flores, arrived, escorted by a beaming David, the scene shifted, David's spotlight widening to encompass them. Dad, looking frail but happy, was immediately surrounded by well-wishers, his kind eyes twinkling as he shook hands. Mom, ever gracious, smiled warmly at everyone, though I could still detect that familiar weariness around her eyes, a shadow left by unspoken anxieties. David, seizing the moment, took center stage, tapping a spoon against a water glass, the sound tinny and sharp in the echoing hall. "All right, everyone. Can I get your attention, please?" The room quieted, a testament to his commanding presence, or perhaps simply a collective desire for everyone to hear what he had to say, to hear the details of the family's latest drama. He launched into a lengthy, overly dramatic speech about Dad's long and respectable life, weaving in anecdotes that subtly redirected praise back to David himself. How he helped Dad fix the fence, how he managed to get the leaky faucet repaired, how he had been there, faithfully, for every mundane crisis. Then came the part I dreaded, the carefully calculated jab. "And of course," David announced, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering for a beat too long on me, a deliberate, pointed stare that was meant to convey pity, judgment, and ultimately triumph. "We wanted to give Dad the very best, but as many of you know, times have been challenging, especially for our parents after some unforeseen market downturns." He sighed dramatically, shaking his head with a show of sincere regret that felt entirely performative, utterly devoid of genuine emotion. So, while some might expect a lavish country club affair, we decided to keep it humble. After all, this modest community center is truly all Dad's savings could afford now. Isn't that right, Dad? He gave a knowing, sympathetic look towards our father, who merely offered a tight, polite smile, clearly uncomfortable with being used as a prop in David's performance. The words hung in the air, a thinly veiled accusation, a public jab not just at the meager savings, which David himself had largely depleted, but also at my supposed lack of contribution, my absence from their perceived financial struggles. It was a calculated move, designed to elicit sympathy for himself, and subtly cast me as the detached, successful daughter who had abandoned her family in their time of need. A ripple went through the room. Some sympathetic glances were cast towards Mom and Dad, while others, more pointedly, flickered towards me. I felt my cheeks flush, a hot wave of mortification washing over me, a physical manifestation of the humiliation David had intended. My hands clenched at my sides, my nails digging into my palms, leaving crescent-shaped indents. It was a minor assault on my reputation, a deliberate humiliation orchestrated by my own brother, right there in front of dozens of family friends and relatives who had known us since childhood. I wanted to scream, to stand up and expose his deceit, to tell everyone that the market downturns were largely his own reckless gambles, that I had been secretly shoring up Mom and Dad's remaining finances for years, ensuring they had enough for their daily needs. But I couldn't. Not here, not now, not on Dad's 80th birthday. The scene was too public, the implications too damaging to our parents, who would bear the brunt of the fallout. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to maintain the serene, composed expression that had served me so well in countless high-stakes boardroom negotiations, in moments where a single misstep could cost millions. My years of training in managing complex situations, of keeping a poker face even when the stakes were astronomical, kicked in. I simply offered a small, reassuring nod to my parents, as if to say, "It's okay, I understand. I'm here." David, meanwhile, seemed to bask in the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, soaking up the commiserating murmurs, the quiet validation of his perceived sacrifice. He continued to speak, now directing guests to their tables for dinner. "Isabel," he called out, his voice tinged with feigned concern, laced with a triumphant undertone, "I've put you over here with the younger cousins. You'll have more fun there, away from all the old folks' talk about mortgages and retirement. After all, you're always off globetrotting, aren't you?" He gestured towards a small, somewhat isolated table near the back of the hall, half hidden behind a large, sad-looking potted fern that seemed as out of place as I felt. It wasn't explicitly the staff table like in the original story, but it might as well have been. It was the table for the outliers, for those not fully integrated into the main family narrative, a subtle but undeniable relegation. Bethany gave me a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes, a silent confirmation of their shared satisfaction, her lips thin and tight with suppressed glee. The slight was clear, a deliberate attempt to marginalize me further, to reinforce my perceived status as an outsider. I nodded, feigning indifference, though every fiber of my being screamed in protest, every nerve ending taut with suppressed fury. I navigated my way through the crowded tables, feeling the weight of the collective gazes, the polite smiles masking the pity or judgment in their eyes, towards my designated corner. The cake hadn't even been cut yet, and already the night felt endless. Seated at the small, somewhat wobbly table near the back, ostensibly with my younger cousins, who had, to their credit, already drifted off to flirt near the punch bowl, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents, I found myself in an uncomfortable limbo, a silent observer of the spectacle David had so meticulously orchestrated. The constant din of conversation, the clinking of plastic glasses, the intermittent bursts of forced laughter from the main tables formed a cacophony that only amplified my sense of isolation. I watched David, now moving from table to table, his arm draped possessively around Bethany's shoulder, accepting pats on the back and commiserating nods from relatives who had undoubtedly bought into his narrative of financial struggle and dutiful sonship. He was performing, a virtuoso of victimhood, and the audience, unfortunately, was captivated. The sting of his public humiliation still smarted, a raw wound beneath my carefully constructed composure. I wondered if Mom and Dad truly understood the depth of his manipulation, or if they were simply too worn down to fight back, too loving to see their son for who he truly was, blinded by their own hopes for him. My eyes, however, weren't fixed solely on David's theatrics. As an architect, my vision was inherently drawn to structures, to space, to potential. I found my gaze drifting around the Willow Creek Community Center, objectively assessing its layout, its condition, its underlying bones. The building was dated, certainly, its brick exterior faded, its interior utilitarian, but it possessed a certain sturdy, no-nonsense charm. The large, open hall, the smaller meeting rooms leading off it, the surprisingly robust foundation I could intuit from its sheer lack of major cracks. It held a quiet promise. A flicker of an idea, a professional instinct, began to stir within me, a welcome distraction from the immediate humiliation. My architectural mind, ever active, started to deconstruct, then reconstruct. What if this space, what if this entire block? My phone vibrated discreetly in my pocket, pulling me momentarily from my professional reverie. It was a text from Ethan Vance, my chief operations officer, a man whose efficiency was matched only by his discretion. Isabel, the message read, concise and to the point, just got off the phone with Mr. Arthur Harrison. He's making a surprise appearance at your family event tonight. Wanted to personally convey excitement about the acquisition. Said he'd introduce himself when he spots you. Heads up, my breath hitched, Mr. Arthur Harrison. The name itself resonated with power and influence. He was the renowned real estate developer, the titan of the industry, whose portfolio included some of the most ambitious urban renewal projects in the state, the very man whose signature was crucial for finalizing my firm's largest deal to date. He was the linchpin, the silent partner, of our latest, most significant venture, the acquisition of the entire Willow Creek Commercial District, a sprawling initiative to revitalize a neglected but strategically located part of town. And the Willow Creek Community Center? It was one of the cornerstone properties in that massive acquisition. The ink on the final contracts had dried just yesterday. A wave of dizzying realization washed over me, a surge of adrenaline that cleared my mind of all other thoughts. This was not a plan I had orchestrated. This was simply fate, a colossal cosmic joke at David's expense, a karmic boomerang flung from the universe itself. He had chosen this location. He had publicly declared its humble status, its financial limitations, its reflection of our parents' supposed destitution. And all the while, unbeknownst to him, this very building, this very land, was on the cusp of becoming part of my firm's most triumphant venture yet. The irony was so profound, so exquisitely painful and poetic, that a slow, almost imperceptible smile began to form on my lips. The veiled revenge I had never sought was about to unfold, utterly indirect, seemingly disconnected from David's petty manipulations, yet undeniably tied to them. His attempt to humble me through financial implication was about to backfire with spectacular, unavoidable force. I straightened in my chair, suddenly feeling less like a marginalized guest and more like the calm before a storm. My earlier humiliation dissipated, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. I no longer needed to hide my presence or my success. Tonight, the truth, in all its inconvenient glory, would speak for itself. I glanced towards the entrance again, my eyes scanning the faces of the newly arriving guests. The atmosphere in the community center, moments ago so stifling, now felt charged with an almost electric anticipation. I watched David, still holding court at a central table, oblivious, his performance still ongoing. He was completely unaware that the stage he had so carefully set for my public diminishment was about to become the very platform for his own, far more significant, unraveling. The architect's gaze, I realized, wasn't just about designing buildings. It was about seeing the unseen, understanding the underlying structures, and recognizing when an old foundation was about to be shaken to its very core. The scent of dust and stale air in the community center suddenly seemed to clear, replaced by the faint, exhilarating smell of new beginnings, of opportunity, and of undeniable karmic truth. The moment Mr. Arthur Harrison entered the Willow Creek Community Center, an almost imperceptible shift occurred in the room's energy. It wasn't a grand, announced arrival, but a subtle ripple, a collective murmur of recognition that spread faster than any wildfire. He was not a man given to ostentatious displays, yet his mere presence commanded attention. A tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 60s, with a distinguished shock of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, he moved through the room with an understated confidence that dwarfed David's earlier, boisterous self-importance. He exchanged brief, polite nods with a few of the more prominent local figures he recognized, the mayor, the head of the Chamber of Commerce. Then his gaze, sharp and assessing, swept across the hall until it landed squarely on me. A faint, knowing smile touched his lips, and he began to make his way through the tables, a path seeming to clear before him as if by silent command. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of apprehension and quiet anticipation. This wasn't how I had planned for the news to break, if it broke at all tonight. I had envisioned a formal press conference, a controlled announcement with carefully crafted statements. But fate, it seemed, had a more dramatic flair, a preference for public unveiling over discreet disclosure. David, still holding forth at a nearby table, mid-sentence in another self-aggrandizing anecdote about his financial sacrifices, suddenly caught sight of Mr. Harrison. His face, which had been beaming with self-congratulation, immediately contorted into a frown of confusion. He had met Mr. Harrison once, briefly, during a casual town event years ago, and I could almost see the gears turning in David's mind as he tried to place the familiar, powerful figure. David, ever the opportunist, ever eager to align himself with influence, started to walk towards him. A fake, ingratiating smile plastered on his face, no doubt intending to introduce himself as the organizer of the event, or perhaps even hint at his valuable financial insights. But Mr. Harrison bypassed David completely. His stride was purposeful, unwavering. He walked directly to my small, isolated table, his hand extended, his smile widening as he reached me. "Isabel Flores," he said, his voice carrying just enough to cut through the general hum of conversation, a clear, resonant tone that drew immediate attention. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Mr. Vance," he referred to Ethan, my COO, "speaks very highly of your firm's work, and frankly, the buzz has been electric." He shook my hand firmly, his grip strong and confident, his eyes twinkling with a shared amusement as he glanced briefly, almost imperceptibly, towards a now dumbfounded David, whose hand, still extended in midair, froze. "I couldn't miss the opportunity to personally congratulate you on the acquisition," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice clear and articulate. "A truly brilliant move, and a significant step forward for the entire Willow Creek community." The words hung in the air, echoing with an almost comical, reverberating effect. Acquisition, Willow Creek community. The implication was instantaneous, a lightning bolt of realization that struck David first, even before anyone else. His jaw dropped, his extended hand slowly falling to his side. Bethany, standing beside him, looked utterly bewildered, her forced smile replaced by a look of dawning horror, her eyes wide with a sudden, dreadful understanding. The general murmurs around the room, which had been about Dad's birthday, now shifted, transforming into hushed whispers, a frantic attempt by curious guests to piece together Mr. Harrison's unexpected appearance and his startling pronouncements. Mr. Harrison, perfectly aware of the sudden shift in atmosphere, but playing his part with the precision of a seasoned actor, continued. He turned slightly, allowing his voice to gain a touch more volume, ensuring his words reached every corner of the hall. For those of you who don't know, he began, his gaze sweeping the now attentive room, Isabel's firm, Flores and Associates, has just successfully acquired the entire Willow Creek commercial district. It's a multi-million-dollar deal that will revitalize this area, bringing new life, new businesses, and new opportunities. And I must say, Miss Flores's vision for the redevelopment, including the innovative plans for this very community center. He paused, gesturing broadly around the utilitarian hall, is nothing short of spectacular. This building, which I understand is hosting a wonderful celebration tonight, will be the cornerstone of a transformative project. We're thrilled to have her leading the charge, and I personally have invested heavily in her vision for this town's future. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of excited chatter. Dad from his table looked utterly stunned, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and burgeoning pride that slowly replaced the earlier weariness. Mom, her hand flying to her mouth, simply stared at me, tears of pure joy, not sadness, welling in her eyes, finally unburdened by the weight of David's shadow. David, meanwhile, had gone completely pale, his face drained of all color, his earlier smugness replaced by a look of abject mortification and utter defeat. He stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, unable to utter a single word, his carefully constructed narrative of the family's financial plight, of their meager savings that could only afford this humble haul, publicly and spectacularly detonated by the very man who embodied the kind of financial power and influence David only dreamed of. The karma was swift, undeniable, and utterly devastating for him. His attempt to humble me through financial implication had backfired with a precision that was almost poetic, turning his stage into my spotlight. Mr. Harrison, oblivious to the deeper family drama he had unwittingly intensified, smiled at me again, a quiet triumph in his eyes. I just wanted to make sure I personally extended my congratulations, Isabel. I'm truly excited about our partnership. He gave me a final, knowing nod, a silent acknowledgement of my professional triumph, a quiet recognition of my worth that David had always denied. Then, with another polite bow to the room, he made his exit, leaving behind a stunned silence that slowly dissolved into a buzz of excited conversation and the lingering echo of his words. The attention of every person in that hall was now fixed solely on me, the architect who had just, indirectly and completely unintentionally, delivered the most profound blow to her brother's carefully guarded pride. The party, which David had intended as a showcase for his victimhood, had just become the grand stage for my unwitting, yet undeniable, karmic victory. The stale air of the community center seemed to clear, replaced by a palpable current of excitement and possibility. The aftermath of Mr. Harrison's departure left a tangible void in the room, a silence heavier than any spoken word, even as the buzz of conversation slowly resumed, now focused intently on me. Every gaze was fixed, a curious mix of astonishment, admiration, and, in some cases, outright disbelief. My initial surge of triumph quickly settled into a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction, yes, a bitter vindication, but also a profound weariness. This wasn't how I had wanted my success to be revealed, not at Dad's 80th birthday, and certainly not as a weapon in a long-simmering family feud. Yet the truth, once spoken, could not be unheard. Mom, her face streaked with happy tears, was already making her way towards me, her arms outstretched, her movements a blur of joyous disbelief. Isabel, my girl. I had no idea. Oh, my brilliant Isabel. Her embrace was tight, filled with a pride that finally felt unburdened by David's shadows, a genuine warmth that had been missing for too long. Dad, initially stunned into silence, slowly approached, a rare, genuine smile gracing his lips. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, shaking his head, his eyes wide with amazement. "My daughter buying up the whole town. Who would have thought?" His voice held a warmth and respect I hadn't heard in years, a stark contrast to his earlier, subtle mockery, a validation I had silently craved for decades. David, however, was gone. He had vanished almost immediately after Mr. Harrison's pronouncement, disappearing through a side door that led to the kitchen, presumably unable to bear the weight of his public humiliation, the utter collapse of his carefully constructed narrative. Bethany, after a moment of frozen disbelief, her face a mask of furious embarrassment, quickly followed him, her movements stiff and jerky. Their abrupt exit only amplified the drama, serving as a silent, undeniable confirmation of the unspoken truth for everyone in the room. Relatives and family friends, previously sympathetic to David's narrative of financial woe and his supposed sacrificial role, now clustered around me, showering me with congratulations and eager questions about my architectural firm, the specifics of the acquisition, and the promising future of Willow Creek. The shift in perception was almost comical. Moments ago, I was the distant, perhaps uncaring, successful daughter and outsider. Now, I was the local hero, the visionary bringing prosperity back to our quaint town. I navigated the flurry of questions with practiced ease, drawing upon years of investor presentations and public speaking engagements. I explained the scope of the project, acknowledged the immense potential for revitalization, and gently steered conversations back to Dad's birthday, trying to reclaim some semblance of normalcy for his special day, to honor him amidst the unexpected chaos. But the underlying current of revelation was too strong to ignore. Later, as the party began to wind down and guests started to depart, Mom pulled me aside, her eyes still sparkling with pride, but now tinged with a new, sober understanding. "Isabel, darling," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "what David said earlier? About the budget, about the community center being all we could afford." Her voice trailed off, filled with remorse and dawning realization. "He told us he had to manage everything so carefully. He said the inheritance, that it was practically gone. He said you were too busy to help, too focused on your grand projects to understand our new reality." We believed him. The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of years of silent manipulation, of a carefully constructed deceit. "Mom," I said gently, taking her trembling hands in mine, "I know what he told you. But you know I've always loved you both. I've been sending money discreetly for years, making sure your bills were paid, that you had what you needed, even when David claimed he was handling everything, even when he painted me as the absentee daughter." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears welling again, but this time, tears of shock and profound sadness. "He never told us," she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief and a deeper sorrow. "He always said he was managing everything, that money was tight, that he was cutting corners so we wouldn't have to burden you. He made it seem like he was protecting us." It was a moment of profound, painful clarity for her. The full extent of David's financial deceit and emotional manipulation finally laid bare, the carefully woven tapestry of his lies unraveling before her eyes. Dad, overhearing our hushed conversation, joined us, his face a mixture of hurt, disbelief, and a quiet, simmering anger. "He even tried to convince me to sell the old fishing cabin," Dad said, his voice raw, his eyes distant as if replaying old conversations. "Said we needed the cash for unexpected expenses. I refused, thank goodness, but I almost did." The quiet reckoning was beginning, not with fire and brimstone, but with the quiet, devastating erosion of years of trust, a foundational shift that would echo through our family for years to come. "We need to talk to David," Mom finally said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands, her usual gentle demeanor replaced by a steely resolve I rarely saw. "This can't go on, not after everything. Not after he's done this to us, and to you." I nodded, knowing this conversation would be the hardest of all, far more challenging than any architectural challenge I'd ever faced. The public humiliation he endured tonight, while not directly orchestrated by me, was the undeniable catalyst. It had ripped open the carefully constructed facade he had built, exposing the raw, festering wound of his insecurity and deceit to the entire town. The quiet reckoning had arrived, and there was no turning back. I knew the road to any form of reconciliation would be long and fraught with pain, filled with difficult truths and uncomfortable silences, but for my parents' sake, and perhaps for the fragile hope of salvaging a semblance of family, It was a conversation that had to happen. I had built a thriving business from nothing, sculpted skylines out of raw ambition and steel. But this, I knew, would be the most complex architecture project of my life, rebuilding the shattered foundations of my own family. It was a daunting task, but one I was finally ready to undertake, armed with the truth and a newfound clarity. The day after Dad's birthday, the air in our family home was thick with an unspoken tension, heavier than the lingering scent of stale cake. David and Bethany had, predictably, chosen to stay at a hotel, presumably too embarrassed to face the immediate aftermath of Mr. Harrison's revelation and the dawning understanding in our parents' eyes. Mom and Dad, their faces etched with a mix of newfound sorrow, confusion, and a quiet anger, kept glancing at me, a silent apology in their eyes, a regret for having believed David's narrative over the years. We needed to address this. I knew putting it off would only allow the wound to fester. I was the one to initiate contact. My voice, calm but firm, the tone I reserved for high-stakes negotiations where emotional control was paramount, cut through David's voicemail. "David, we need to talk, all of us. Your parents, Bethany, and me, no more avoiding, no more excuses." There was a long, excruciating pause on the other end when he finally called back, filled with the static of his obvious resistance. "What's there to talk about, Isabel?" He finally spat, his voice laced with bitterness, a raw edge of wounded pride. "You made your point yesterday, loud and clear. Just let it go. You got what you wanted." "No," I countered, my voice unwavering, betraying none of the tremor in my own heart. "This isn't about my point, David. This is about Mom and Dad and about the truth. It's time we finally faced it." He eventually capitulated, grudgingly agreeing to meet later that afternoon, but only at his house, a feeble, last-ditch attempt to control the setting, to reclaim some semblance of authority. Walking into David and Bethany's home felt strangely surreal, a stark contrast to the familiar comfort of our childhood house. It was a perfectly manicured suburban residence, filled with tasteful but generic furniture, impersonal and devoid of the lived-in warmth of family photos and mismatched heirlooms. Bethany sat stiffly on the sleek, modern couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, avoiding eye contact, her lips a thin, white line. David stood by the expansive bay window, his back to us, staring out at his meticulously kept lawn, a picture of wounded pride and defensive posture. Mom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her voice trembling slightly, was the first to speak. "David," she began, her voice soft but resolute, "your father and I, we need to understand what truly happened to our inheritance. And what Isabel has been doing for us all these years, quietly, without seeking any recognition." David flinched, his shoulders tensing before turning slowly, his face pale, his jaw clenched. "It was the market, Mom," he burst out, his voice tinged with exasperation, as if reciting a well-rehearsed script. "I already explained. There were unforeseen downturns, global shifts, things beyond my control, and Isabel. What has she been doing? Trying to make us look bad, trying to rub her success in my face." The conversation devolved quickly, spiraling into a painful rehashing of old grievances, accusations, and denials. David, initially defensive and indignant, repeatedly deflected, blaming circumstances, bad luck, conspiracy, anything but his own recklessness and poor judgment. Bethany interjected occasionally with thinly veiled criticisms of my career, suggesting I was too busy with fancy city projects and high-rise dreams to understand real family struggles or the sacrifices involved in staying close to home. I let them talk, absorbing their bitterness, their pain, their desperate need to control the narrative. I watched for the cracks to appear in David's carefully constructed facade, waiting for the moment his composure would finally shatter. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of circular arguments, I spoke, my voice calm but resolute, cutting through the rising tension like a sharp blade. "David, stop, just stop. We know about the inheritance. We know about the money I've been sending to Mom and Dad, discreetly, month after month, which you never mentioned. We know the community center stunt yesterday was designed to humiliate me, to reinforce your narrative of financial strain, to diminish me in front of our family. Why, David? Why go to such lengths? Why cause so much pain?" His carefully constructed defense finally, irrevocably, shattered. David, who had always been so glib, so composed, so good at charming his way out of trouble, suddenly sagged, his shoulders slumping as if under an unbearable weight. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw not resentment, not anger, not even just shame, but raw, unfiltered pain and inadequacy in his eyes, a mirroring of the insecurity I had battled within myself. "Because I'm tired, Isabel," he burst out, his voice hoarse, raw with emotion, tears brimming, finally spilling down his cheeks. "I'm so tired of feeling like a failure next to you. Everywhere I turn, it's Isabel the architect, Isabel the visionary, Isabel who built an empire from nothing. You leave home, and you build something incredible. I stay, and I can't even hold down a decent job. Everything I touch turns to dust. I just wanted Mom and Dad to see me as capable, as responsible. I wanted to be the one who took care of them, the one who sacrificed, the one who was here for them. But I messed up. I always mess up." His confession, a torrent of long-suppressed insecurities and self-loathing, hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken pain. Bethany, surprisingly, reached for his hand, her own eyes now glistening with unshed tears, a rare moment of genuine empathy and shared vulnerability. "He's always felt like he was living in your shadow, Isabel," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to her earlier sharp tone. I looked at my brother, truly seeing him, perhaps for the first time. Not as a betrayer, not as a rival, but as a deeply flawed, insecure man grappling with his own perceived failures, suffocating under the weight of expectations, real or imagined. My own resentment, years of feeling unappreciated and misunderstood by my family, of constantly having to defend my choices, began to soften, to dissolve into a profound, aching empathy. "David," I said, my voice gentle, reaching across the chasm that had divided us for so long, "you don't need to compete with me. You never did. And your worth isn't tied to your financial success or to how you compare to me. Mom and Dad love you just as you are. They always have." I then spoke, with uncharacteristic vulnerability, about my own loneliness in achieving success, the quiet isolation of always striving, sometimes feeling like I had sacrificed personal connection for professional ambition. I admitted that despite my triumphs, there were times I envied his seemingly simpler life, his immediate connection to our parents, his stable marriage and family. "Sometimes," I confessed, looking directly into his tear-filled eyes, "I come home to an empty apartment after a 16-hour workday, and I see photos of your family barbecues, your kids' birthday parties, and I wonder if I made the right choices, if success truly keeps you warm at night." He looked genuinely surprised, the tears on his face momentarily forgotten. The raw honesty was a breakthrough, a seismic shift in our long-stalled dynamic. We talked for hours, unearthing years of misunderstanding, of unspoken resentments on both sides, like pulling weeds from a long-neglected garden. I confessed my frustration with his financial irresponsibility and the pain it had caused our parents. He, in turn, admitted his envy and how it had led him to desperate, dishonest acts, his voice thick with shame. He apologized, truly apologized, for the manipulation, for the public humiliation, for the damage he had wrought. It was a painful, messy conversation, filled with tears and difficult truths, but it was real, finally. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their living room, an unexpected thought, a seed of an idea, began to form in my mind. Something that merged my professional world with our shattered family reality. The Willow Creek Commercial District redevelopment. This massive project that was about to transform the town would require a new local community liaison, someone with deep roots and a keen understanding of local sentiment. Someone who had always wanted to prove their worth, and perhaps, finally, work on a project that truly mattered, one that genuinely benefited the community. "David," I said cautiously, "I'm redeveloping the entire Willow Creek Commercial District. It's going to be a huge undertaking, requiring a lot of local coordination and relationship building. It needs someone who genuinely understands this town, someone who's familiar with its nuances and its people, someone who wants to make a real impact and who has an opportunity for a fresh start. What would you think about joining my team? Not as a subordinate, but as a key member, a community engagement specialist." His eyes, red-rimmed but now clear, stared at me, a flicker of disbelief, then, slowly, a glimmer of hope that spread across his face like the dawn. It was a risky offer, a bold step, but it was an attempt to rebuild, to turn betrayal into a shared path towards a healthier, more honest family foundation. It was an olive branch, extended not out of pity, but out of a desperate, newfound hope for connection. The air cleared significantly after that raw, emotionally exhausting confrontation. David, still reeling from the events of the birthday party and his subsequent confession, looked at me with a mix of awe and trepidation, a quiet humility replacing his usual bravado. My offer to join my firm, not as an act of pity but as a genuine professional opportunity, seemed to take him completely by surprise, a lifeline thrown into his sea of self-doubt. Bethany, who had been a silent, tense observer through much of his confession, visibly relaxed, a hint of genuine relief washing over her face, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders too. We discussed the proposition further, delving into the specifics of the community engagement specialist role. It was a demanding position, requiring integrity, excellent communication skills, and a true commitment to the project qualities I knew David, beneath his layers of insecurity, genuinely possessed. He was, after all, a natural people person, a trait he had often misused in the past for personal gain, but one that could be invaluable for fostering positive relationships within Willow Creek as our massive redevelopment took shape. He cautiously accepted, a fragile truce settling between us, the first tentative step on a long road to genuine reconciliation. The next few weeks were a delicate dance of rebuilding, not just of buildings, but of trust. Mom and Dad, having absorbed the full, painful truth of David's financial dealings and my quiet, years-long support, were heartbroken by his deception, yet strangely relieved that the truth was finally out in the open. The silent weight that had burdened our family for years had finally been lifted. They held David accountable for his actions, insisting he seek professional financial counseling and make concrete amends, but also offering him their unwavering love and support, a testament to their enduring parental devotion. They apologized to me for their unwitting complicity in David's deceptive narrative, for misjudging my devotion, and I, in turn, reassured them that their love and belief in me had always been my true foundation, the unwavering ground upon which I built my life and career. We began to talk more openly, to heal the emotional wounds that had festered for so long, finding comfort in shared vulnerability. David, to his credit, threw himself into his new role with a surprising fervor. He was a quick study, genuinely eager to prove himself, not just to me, but to himself. He approached local businesses, community leaders, and residents with a newfound humility and an earnest desire to understand their needs and concerns. He explained the redevelopment plans with a genuine enthusiasm that was infectious, helping to bridge the gap between abstract architectural designs and the tangible impact on people's lives. He reported directly to my project manager, but I kept a close eye on his progress, offering guidance and support when needed, subtly stepping in when I saw him struggling with the new demands. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Old habits of defensiveness occasionally resurfaced, and there were moments of frustration, but with open communication and a shared goal, we navigated these challenges. He learned to appreciate the meticulous planning, the ethical considerations, and the long-term vision that went into large-scale architectural projects, gaining a newfound respect for my work and the demanding nature of true business. And I, in turn, saw a side of David I hadn't seen in years, a dedicated, passionate individual who, when channeled correctly, could achieve remarkable things, someone who genuinely cared about his community. He began to understand that true success wasn't about quick gains or public perception, but about genuine contribution, ethical conduct, and the profound satisfaction of building something meaningful. 3 months after Dad's birthday, I visited Willow Creek again, this time for a scheduled community meeting regarding the next phase of the redevelopment. David stood before a packed hall, his posture confident, his voice clear and articulate, as he eloquently presented the project's progress, fielding questions from the residents with a calm ease that was genuinely impressive. He looked healthier, happier, no longer burdened by the need to pretend or compete, his eyes holding a genuine spark of engagement. After the meeting, he approached me, a genuine smile on his face, devoid of any forced charm or subtle mockery. "Isabel," he said, his voice sincere, I never thought I'd say this, but thank you. This feels right. It feels like I'm actually building something real, something that matters for a change. Not just for myself, but for this town. We talked about the project, discussing logistics and future steps, but also about our parents, about the slow, steady progress of our family healing. The old rivalry hadn't vanished completely. Some scars run too deep to ever fully disappear, but it had transformed into a mutual respect, a shared purpose, a recognition of each other's unique strengths. We were learning to be partners instead of rivals, to leverage our complementary skills. He brought the invaluable local connection and the people skills. I brought the vision and the technical expertise. At Dad's next birthday, a smaller, more intimate affair, we held it at the newly renovated Willow Creek Community Center. It was no longer the dreary, utilitarian hall of my memory, but a bright, modern, and inviting space filled with natural light and a palpable sense of community, a testament to the initial phase of our redevelopment. David had personally overseen the early renovations, ensuring every detail was perfect, his pride evident in every polished surface. Mom and Dad, beaming with pride, looked healthier and happier than they had in years, their faces unburdened by the financial anxieties and familial tensions that had plagued them. "I haven't seen you two laugh together like this since you were kids," Mom whispered to David and me as we shared a quiet moment, watching Dad enthusiastically explain the new building's features to a curious neighbor. The devastating revelation at Dad's 80th birthday had been a painful catalyst, yes, but it had also been the key to unlocking a deeper, more honest connection between us. It forced us to confront the unspoken truths, to acknowledge the wounds, and to begin the arduous, yet ultimately rewarding, process of rebuilding. We hadn't just rebuilt a community center. We had begun the long process of rebuilding our family. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where a trusted family member's actions led to a deep sense of betrayal, forcing you to reconsider the very nature of your relationship? How did you navigate those turbulent emotional waters? I'm eager to read your personal experiences in the comments section below. And if this narrative resonated with you, please ensure you hit that subscribe button and share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing that healing is possible, even after the deepest betrayals, and that sometimes the hardest truths can be the foundation for the most meaningful connections. Thank you for dedicating your time to listening to my journey, and always keep in mind that true familial bonds aren't forged in perfection, but emerge from the courage to face truths, embrace honesty, and embark on the arduous, yet ultimately rewarding, process of rebuilding what was broken.